Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Two Wise Guys. We are recording live on Saturday, May 6th, 2017. I'm Chris, your host, broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. And on the East Coast, broadcasting from Columbia, South Carolina, is my co host and brother in law, Dan.
Hello.
Yeah, we want to welcome you to the show, and thanks for tuning in tonight. If you're out there on the web, we really appreciate you. For those of you who are new, this is a show centered around thoughtful discussion. And we talk about things from science and technology to news and conspiracy theories. If you want to join in the conversation, feel free to jump in on the live chat, which is on the right of your screen. You can also reach out to us by email to wiseguys.org@gmail.com. And if video isn't your thing, or you want to listen on the go, we also have a podcast that's coming soon. It's going to be available on SoundCloud and possibly iTunes in the future. And we'll keep you guys updated on that as that progresses. Without further ado, let's get into our first segment, the good, the bad, and the strange.
All right. And this week is my week to pick, so it's going to be a little bit of an interesting mix of things. Instead of going full on politics like we've done in the past, I wanted to kind of break it up and do a few different things here. So what I thought we could take a look at for the good is this cool new project that I heard about, I think it was about a week and a half ago, called EdgeX Foundry. It's a project that comes from the Linux Foundation, but it's actually it's more being seeded by Dell, the computer company. And I personally think it's really cool. I know that there's not everyone who's out there is going to be super technical with this stuff. So the big idea behind it is like, if anyone's listened to me for any length of time, I'm concerned about the cloud technologies, cloud computing, smart devices, how everything's connected to the internet, and the security vulnerabilities that are there. And what they're aiming to do with this EdgeX Foundry project is to take the cloud and the Internet of Things and bring it inside of, in this instance, a company's network or LAN. And the reason I think it's cool is that it's great that it has these functionalities for industry, but usually when things go industrial first, they inevitably make their way to the commercial grade, to the consumers. And so this makes me excited because I like IoT things. I like the idea of smart TVs and stuff like that. I just don't trust the providers. I just don't trust the internet and all the people who are out there trying to do nefarious things. And so I'm really excited about the idea of being able to, at some point in the future, possibly bring the cloud into my own network, not just my own personal cloud, but the actual resources of a Google or a Dell or whatever it might be. Not the singer Adele, that's something different. But to be able to bring this into maybe my own home network, or be able to set this up for a school or for a church or something like that, so that they could utilize these things in a more secure way. But the thing I think is really cool about it, that gives it a little more footing than most of these other projects have had in the past, is, I don't know if you can see it on the screen there, but there's a bunch of different companies. It's I believe 60 total companies that are currently signed up. They just announced this, and they've already got 60 companies that are on board with it. So clearly they've done their research and their homework, and they've reached out and touched base with these other companies. And there's some pretty big names on there. Companies like the Linux Foundation, for one, Linux is very big in the server industry, and I'm a big Linux user, so that is in itself is really cool. That it's promoting an open source kind of technology, so it's something that'll be available for individuals to take, to change, to adapt over time. It's got companies like Dell. I don't know if you can see Ubuntu on there. That's the largest Linux distribution that's out there, and so it's backed by a company called Canonical. So having the resources of Dell and Canonical together is really kind of a big deal. VMware is one of the biggest names in virtualization, so having their support is also a big deal. AMD's processor company. So I get excited about nerdy things, and this is one of those things that I got excited about this week. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this, or am I just kind of off base with my nerdiness?
It sounds really cool. I'm not too familiar with that area of expertise, so seems interesting though.
Okay, I'll take that to mean I'm just a little too nerdy today, but we can move on to the bad, and This one comes from the BBC that Canada considers retaliation for U.S. tariff on softwood lumber, and this was updated about 6 hours ago. And this one I thought was pretty fascinating. I didn't know about it until just a few days ago, but apparently the U.S. and Donald Trump during the campaign talked a lot about placing tariffs on trade goods so that we would be able to compete on the international market. Which I'm more of an advocate for free trade capitalism than having tariffs and trade wars. But I find this to be troubling personally. Canada is our neighbor to the north. They're one of our oldest allies that we have, and I just feel like there's more efficient ways to decrease our deficit than by instituting tariffs and angering our neighbors and our international neighbors and our allies, if that makes sense. But yeah, if you want to check this one out, it's on the BBC. Chris, do you have anything you want to add on this one?
I'm curious. It's a tariff on lumber. Wouldn't Canada have more lumber than the United States?
Yeah.
So are we talking about the United States importing, or are we talking about tariff on exports?
Well, a tariff, you wouldn't put a tariff on exports. You would put a tariff on imports. So tariff is basically a reverse tax. So with the tax, if you go out and you go out to like Home Depot or Lowe's and you buy, a plank of wood, you buy some lumber, you pay a tax on top of that. The consumer is charged. Whereas with the tariff, it would be like if you were to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get that plank of lumber, you go to check out, and then Lowe's or Home Depot has to then pay you because they're trying to sell it to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
so
I guess the point I was trying to make was that Canada would seem to have plenty of lumber of their own. Why would they be buying our lumber?
They're not. They're exporting to us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. That was the point of it. Was that the U.S. is, we're a major importer of a lot of goods and services, and so it mentions in the article that states like Oregon, for instance, are happy about this tariff because they have, I believe that Oregon is one of the largest producers of softwood lumber in the United States, and so this is one of those things where it's good for us, but if our putting a tariff on softwood lumber coming from Canada, if they retaliate and they put, I don't even know what they import or what they would import from us, aside from like crack or something like that. But if they were to, if we were to try and export, say, oil, let's just go with oil because can't think of anything else off the top of my head, and they put a tariff on U.S. oil, that would create a further incentive for the Canadian government to, it's not the Canadian government, for the U.S. government to stop selling to Canada, which hurts our economy in the long run. That's how trade wars are initiated.
Gotcha.
That makes sense.
So yeah, I see I understand that now. So they're just upset because they feel less people are going to buy Canadian lumber, and they're going to go in the United States are going to buy Canadian lumber, and they're going to go to other places centered in the United States so they don't have to pay a tariff. Yeah,
and so I mean, I think this is Donald Trump's way of trying to create more jobs, I guess you could say, or the whole campaign was based on America first, and so creating incentive to buy American lumber rather than buying cheaper imports from Canada.
Right, I see. Oh, so basically, we're getting in trouble with them for trying to stimulate our own economy.
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily. I mean, when it comes to international relations, it's not a very good way to stimulate your economy. I mean, it may work out, but it's always good to be friendly with your neighbors. I don't necessarily think this is a good thing, but I mean, I can see why people would approve of it. I just don't think tariffs are usually a very good way of doing things. I feel like it decreases competition in the marketplace, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And going on to the strange, I don't know if you heard about this one. I heard about this one on another podcast. It was the Steve Gibson's Security Now podcast. That was pretty interesting. And Burger King's new ad forces Google Home to advertise the Whopper. And this actually reminded me of the story that you shared. I believe it was in episode 1 maybe, or episode 2, where you talked about the 4chan trolls going after Shia LaBeouf's He Will Not Divide Us art piece. And what they did on this one is a 15-second clip, and you can see the screenshot of it here. And it's this young man in the Burger King outfit, and he's holding a Whopper, and he says something along the lines of, "This is a 15-second ad. I can't really say much about the Whopper in this time span, so let's try this." And he leans in close to the camera and says, "Okay, Google, what is the Whopper burger?" And then that anyone who had a Google Home device set up near their TV, it triggered it to go off, and it started going through the Wikipedia page of the Whopper burger. And so I just thought it was hilarious. It was kind of a fun story. Apparently it made Google kind of mad and upset some people, but I thought it was hilarious.
That's genius. I mean, if you're marketing something, you're always looking for ways to sort of get your foot in the door. If you're struggling, I mean, anyone who's ever done sales knows that the hardest part is of a sale is actually getting your foot in the door, because most doors get closed in your face or they don't open in the first place. So if you're a company that's in a marketplace that's pretty crowded, and Burger King is, and they're not necessarily doing as well as other companies such as McDonald's, et cetera, then that's a great way to sort of get your foot in the door and do something, albeit it's just using the existing infrastructure, if you will, to accomplish that. I don't understand why Google would be upset by that, but I think that's a pretty smart thing.
Well, I think they were upset about it because I think what they were saying is that they felt like it was they were utilizing their product, like Burger King was utilizing Google's product in a way that they were not authorized to do. And I apologize if I accidentally set off anyone's Google Home who's listening to this. Again, I thought it was funny, but apparently a lot of people got upset about it.
I mean, the term Google is almost a part of our lexicon now. So it's gone beyond the sort of status of like, okay, you're using a company name, because you say, I'm going to go Google something, which means I'm going to go search for something. So I feel like that's kind of a gray area. I mean, they are a company, yes, but it's a part of our lexicon now. So I don't see what the fuss is.
Apparently the OK Google, I think is what it was, because it was triggering their device. But I don't know. I don't think it was really that big a deal.
But, OK Google. But I mean, that bothers me from the sense that somebody could essentially, you can copyright a phrase, or we own that, and I never have really liked that sort of a thing. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Was that everything?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you had more. Okay, so we're going to move on into our next segment. We call it Fact or Fiction. And every week we have 10 headlines. One of us presents. This week it'll be me presenting the headlines to Dan. And the idea behind it is there's 10 headlines. Some of them are true, some of them are false. Maybe all of them are true, maybe all of them are false. And Dan has to decide for himself if each headline is true or false. And he gets a point for a correct answer and no point for an incorrect answer. So here we go. Let me screen share here. Headline number 1, man in speedboat dressed as pirate attempts to hijack cruise ship.
Oh, that sounds too realistic. I'm going to say false or fiction.
That is correct.
Yes.
How do I advance? Oh, there we go. Alligator handcuffed after wandering into Slidell garage.
What's a Slidell garage?
I don't know.
Oh boy. Oh man, I'm gonna go with fact.
True. That is correct. 2 points, Dan. 2 points. I don't know how you got that.
I don't know either. I'm just going by my gut instinct here.
Singing mummy at Smithsonian leaves caretakers baffled.
I'm gonna say that's a fact as well.
That is fiction.
Ah, you got me.
I completely made that up. Hey, that's a pretty good one, huh?
It is good. I could see someone like putting some little trinket in there or something to make it seem like it was singing.
I have Tourette's, claims man arrested for repeatedly shouting "shut up" at moviegoers during silent film screening.
I'm gonna go with fact.
That also is Fiction. I
Oh,
made that
tied 2-2.
up. I really worked hard on these. I was like, I gotta fool Dan. I gotta see if I can pull out a win this week.
Well, you're doing a good job so far.
All right. Thank you, sir. Man stranded for hours after car breaks down in mountains, dresses in drag to hitch a ride.
Oh man. Let's see. I'll go with fiction on that one.
That is fiction. I made that up.
That'd be terrifying, to be honest.
I mean, think about it. It's hard to hitch a ride, right? So maybe he was trying to.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's 3-2. Headline number 6, masked gunman who was punched by elderly man to press charges, says police chief.
Unfortunately, I believe that's a fact.
That is fiction.
Oh, wow. Good job on that one. That was realistic.
I've been reading a lot of headlines. I was trying to catch on to sort of their lingo. All right, so 3-3 tie. We're going down the home stretch here. Babysitter stunned after she receives $2,000 cash from her employer.
Ooh. Yeah, I've heard of stuff like this happening with waiters and waitresses. I'm going to say that one's fact.
Fiction. I made it up.
Oh, Chris takes the lead.
4-3, Chris. Sorry. Man attempts to leave store with chainsaw stuffed down his pants.
I don't even see how that's practical or possible. I'm going to say that one's fiction.
This is fact. This is actually a Florida man.
Oh, why am I not surprised?
Wow.
Oh, my.
3-5. Or is it? Yeah, 3-5, right?
Yeah, 3-5. How many more you got? You got 2 more?
Two more.
Okay.
The aliens made me do it, says woman who attempted to hold up McDonald's for 69 Big Macs.
That one sounds like it's fact.
It's fiction.
You're getting good. You're getting
I told
good
you
at this.
I really worked at this. 3-6, so it's a guaranteed win for Chris today. Last headline. Man caught with active meth lab in his pants.
I have no idea. I'm going to say that one's a fact because it sounds so crazy.
Yes, it is fact. That is
All
correct.
right.
That also was a Florida man, believe it or not. So,
well, it's a meth story, so of course it's a Florida man.
Why do they always do that? Why is it always Florida people that have like the craziest?
There's an old expression I remember hearing once. It was "Welcome to Florida, crap rolls downhill." But looks like this time around we've got looks like Chris wins that one 6-4. Congratulations, sir.
Woo! First time for the presenter to win. Okay, so we're to our mains. That is cool. Is that Zelda?
No, that was Final Fantasy. I was trying to give you the little victory ringtone there.
Final Fantasy. Our main segment here, and Dan is super excited. I got to have a little snipe. So take it away, Dan.
All right. So what we're going to be talking about this week is something called the Overton Window. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the Overton Window. It's kind of I wouldn't say it's a new concept. It's been fairly well known within politically active circles for probably going on, I would say maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 years by now. But it was this concept that was created by a researcher named Overton, and it's the idea of how political discourse, or even just regular discourse, it can apply to many different disciplines and subjects, and how we see acceptable discourse within society change over time. And so I used this example last night, so I'm going to do it again. We've got a little iPod cable here, and imagine this line that you see on your screen is the line in which it's kind of like the continuum of what's acceptable and what's not in our everyday conversation with people. So the example I usually go to, because I feel like it is relatable to most people, is airport security. So you've got your spectrum. On this end of the spectrum, it's elevated here. This side you've got absolutely no airport security whatsoever. You can just come and go as you wish. You can go up to the terminal. You might even be able to go outside onto the tarmac if you really wanted to. And then on the other side of the spectrum over here, you've got highly oppressive things such as like cavity searches, which nobody wants to talk about because it's nasty. And where my head would be in the shot here is what would be known as the Overton window. And the idea of the Overton window is that this is crazy and this is crazy. So wherever the window is, or wherever my head is, if it's over here is where society at large is when it comes to any number of issues, whether it be political, social, economic, whatever the case may be. So I know a lot of people who may be watching this are a bit younger. A lot of people that I work with are younger. A lot of the younger people that I work with are actually born in like the late 90s. So I know a few guys that work who were born in 97, and they don't remember a pre 9/11 world. And so, for instance, like when I was a kid, I remember in 1997 taking my first airplane ride, and the window was over here. So we had an opportunity for my older sister's friends decided they were going to come and visit us at the airport before we flew off away from Florida, where we grew up, and we were preparing to move up to Indiana. So they came to visit and say goodbye. And at the last minute before we went to board the plane, they showed up and they all just started running up, giving hugs and everything. And they just came straight up to the terminal. They were able to come all the way up to the gate, and there was no issue. And then 9/11 happened, and the whole window shifts. And now you've got full body scanners, you've got TSA agents. Most of the people that I talk to at work, they're so young, they don't remember life before 9/11. They don't remember, they've never been to an airport before there was TSA. And so when you go send through these long lines, they don't understand what's actually happening, because they don't understand why people my age and why other people who are older are frustrated and aggravated. They think it's just a general inconvenience. It's that we actually remember a time before that was a thing, because the window has shifted so much. And you can apply it to many different things. For instance, within like the LGBT community and debate about gay marriage, which became a thing a couple years ago, and the transgender bathrooms, which was an issue last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago. Those are things that, I mean, the gay marriage thing has been on the radar for a long time, but as far as allowing transgenders to use whatever bathroom they wanted to, that was never a discussion until just a couple years ago, and it's because that window has shifted over time. So the big idea behind it is that on that continuum, the window it shifts slowly. It'll move one way with when culture is moving one direction, and then all of a sudden it might move back a little bit. But there are sometimes situations where that window makes a giant leap, and in one direction or another. So that's the general concept of the Overton window. And it's a concept that most people aren't familiar with, but I think it explains a lot of. It helps us to at least have a visual of why things are the way they are in American society and culture, but also in terms of global events even. So Chris, I want to turn over to you. What are your thoughts on the Overton window?
I think it's really interesting because the way that, as I understand it, it came from a man that was involved in broadcasting, or at least in media, and the whole concept of it really is basically what will people accept, like you were saying, and so it's whatever falls into this window, as you were saying. So to me it's really interesting, like you were saying, how that window does shift over time, and it can actually move back and forth to what we think of as being less freedom or more freedom, and what's acceptable in different areas. I feel like that we could continue along with the direction that you were going in, and just what your next point was.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the point that I'm trying to make is there's a lot of stuff that's going on in America, and Chris and we're both more conservative. I think it's fair to say, at least I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for you. I tend to lean more libertarian. So my general view on things is just leave people alone. Stop trying to force your way onto you know, stop trying to use the government's coercive force, no matter what your party is, no matter what your ideology is. Stop trying to use the government's coercive force to make your viewpoint the national normality. So whether that be, you know, somebody who's conservative who wants to utilize the power of the government to, you know, to squash the free speech and protesting of people on the left. You know, I may think that like these college protests that have been happening all over the last couple of years are, I frankly feel like they're very dumb and they're unproductive. But, you know, I feel like as long as they're not being destructive and they're not impeding on the rights of others, they have a right to go out and do that if they want. And there's no one on the right who has the right to go out in there and squash that, you know, by any means. But at the same time, people on the left need to realize that they don't have the right to have some sort of supposed moral high ground that allows them to come in and use coercive force to silence conservatives, libertarians, or even just people who are trying to live their lives. And I feel like the idea of the window is that things are changing. We actually have someone in the chat room. This is awesome. Sorry, I'm a little ADD tonight. But we've got a comment from Nick Beach asking what is causing the window to shift. And honestly, that can be any number of things, really. It can be social drivers. It can be entertainment. It can be backlash against entertainment. You know, if things get a little too outrageous, I think that's what happened with Donald Trump, to be honest, is I mean, people asked me all last year, you know, did I think that Donald Trump had a chance to win? I thought he was a joke from the beginning, like a lot of people did. But that window shifted, and I believe it was a backlash against the shifting that had been taking place slowly over the last 8 years with President Obama, to look at it from a more political standpoint. But, you know, there's a lot of things that can cause the window to shift. It can be changes in content within entertainment. So, for instance, within the music industry, music has a way of swaying people's emotions and people's thoughts on things. It may be even be subconscious, but it plays to our emotions, and our emotions are what betray us. And so we end up having this system where, you know, we get into a particular band or a particular artist, and all of a sudden we find ourselves singing along to these songs. And over time, if we're not careful, we can end up thinking the same kind of thoughts without even realizing it. You know, we may be into the music just because of the music, but it may end up at least slightly altering our particular worldview on particular issues. So I think that, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, just type another message in there, and I'll try to answer it a bit clearer.
I'll just chime in too here. You know, I think that's really a great point that you made as well, Dan. And one thing that I believe causes the window to shift is people who want to change public perception. So like your example of Donald Trump bringing sort of like ideas that seemed like they were fringe at the beginning, but then the window began to shift, like you're saying, due to external causes. We look at also other things like, you know, I'll be kind of gentle with the subject, but the government being bigger or smaller, and should the government have a say-so in whether things like gay marriage are legal or not, or should there even be a law that talks about that? So we could see that in that particular instance, the Overton window has shifted to from, you know, homosexual marriage from being a fringe topic or a fringe, so it's not really that acceptable. The window has shifted to where there's a lot more freedom in that area. And a lot of that has to do with the discourse that happens in the media. So, for example, nowadays in social media, we have a lot of conversations going on different platforms, and it's where the discussion pushes things. So, if you're an influencer, if you're a person that has influence in that arena, such as well-known bloggers or political figures or political pundits on the news, you're going to share your opinions based on something that might be outside of that window that seems a little bit more unthinkable, and sort of try to bring it into the window. In other words, yes, it is acceptable to ban Muslims, for example. We'll just throw that out there, but that's more of like a fringe thing. Most people would not feel very good about just banning people from a certain particular group of people. So that's an example of someone who would be trying to shift that window and move it based on their own rhetoric, their own belief system, and sharing it with everyone.
Well, and then there's also a less extreme example that I think everyone can relate to is income tax. We never had an income tax before the 20th century. I mean, we had one briefly, I think, during like the Civil War. And then I think there's also a brief one during the War of 1812. But in both of those instances, they went away because the income tax was never supposed to be part of the American system of governance. And it wasn't until the Federal Reserve Act and then I think it was the 16th Amendment that allowed the income tax. But back then it was a big thing. Like, it wasn't an issue. We didn't have a tax. If we did have a tax, it was temporary. But now we live in a system where if you simply present the idea for a flat 10% tax, or even if you want to be more, if you don't think 10% is enough, you can do what Russia did and do a 13% flat tax. And everyone thinks that's crazy. It's absolutely insane. We have to have a higher income tax than that. Well, why? We never had one before. We just chose to institute it and normalize it. So now that window has shifted over time. And this one, whereas the airport security thing changed, you could say overnight after 9/11, the income tax window has slowly shifted over the course of 100 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting with your airport example, how the Overton window has actually shifted for some people, but not for everyone, or it's shifted more for some people and not for others. So in your example, people who were flying for maybe 30, 40 years without any sort of hindrance in the terminals are going to be much less likely to have their windows shift. In other words, be accepting of these new rules. They're going to continue to live their life and think it's the worst thing ever, and it's going to be a really big issue for them. Whereas someone who began flying maybe just a couple of years before the higher security in airports is probably going to adapt a lot more quickly. Someone like Dan or I mean, I was only, I was younger, so I had probably only flown maybe 5 to 10 years before that event actually happened. I was only flying for that duration of time. So at this point, I'm just kind of used to it. And then on the other side, you have the people who are even younger than us who, like you were saying, Dan, don't even care because that's just all they know.
Yeah, but also to touch on the idea of the older people, the window not shifting as much. I think for some it hasn't, but for a lot of them it has, because it's more the narrative is more subtle than that, because there has to be something that goes along with it that normalizes it. Otherwise, it falls apart and the window shifts back. In this particular case, it was terrorism. So like we had this system to where the window was over on this side and it wasn't a big deal, and people would fly and not have to worry about airport security. And then 9/11 happened. That window would have slowly come back if there wasn't that persistent threat, or at least the perceived persistent threat of more airplane hijackings and terrorist attacks and stuff like that. And so I think it comes back to the idea that, like, if there's not something to support it more fully, then it's not going to be able to last in that same way, which is what allows that fluctuation to occur naturally.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think an interesting way of thinking about it, though, is why is the focus on airports? Why is the focus on certain areas like that? I understand that people are switching countries, and somehow, the narrative is that people coming from other countries are much more of a danger to us than people who are already living here, who may even be from those countries. So to someone like me, or to someone who's even older, they may not fall for those tricks. So that's sort of what I'm saying. Like, some people may not have had their windows shifted, and that's just based on their paradigm, their viewpoint of that. Because, for example, why don't we have security when we're going into malls or crazy like with an airport, where people carrying around bags of stuff, high traffic areas? We do have security in large events and gatherings of people somewhat, but not to a great extent, So I feel like when we implemented that, when that was implemented by the United States after 9/11, the higher airport security, it was sort of in response, because this happened on an airplane. But we've seen that even since then, there really haven't been. I mean, I could probably count on one hand the number of incidents that have occurred in the air, and even before that, I don't think there were that many incidents. So we're taking an isolated instance where something awful happened, but we jumped on it and shifted that window in that particular area. So to me, It's more about an agenda being expressed and trying to get something normalized so that people become used to it, than it is about actually providing public safety, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think it was some agenda to try and shift the thing. I mean, it's a natural knee-jerk reaction. Everyone, I don't know. I remember what it was like on 9/11. Like, I don't know how many people who are watching are old enough to remember it, but I remember I was in 12th grade. I was taking a standardized test in high school. It was a standardized test for the state of Indiana, and they came in and told us what was going on. So I went down and saw the live feed of it, and I saw one of the towers come down, and after we all got released early from school. So after school let out, I remember going home. I went in my room, and just the rest of the day was spent watching the news and watching the coverage of what was going on. And I was afraid. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a fear of like someone's going to come into my house and hurt me or my family. It was this general concern, this general fear of like what's going to happen next, because clearly this was a situation that at least I know I never thought of. I don't know. I just think that I don't think that it's trying to drive some agenda. I think it's a natural thing that happens, because I feel like these things we have to look at it from a macro scale. It's not necessarily individuals hosting, and it could be. I mean, that's where the conspiracy side comes into things, is that, you know, maybe it is people behind the scenes driving these things to shift the window. Like, for instance, you could look at the education system, and the window has shifted very much over time. And I think that was very much an organized, concerted effort to make that window shift over generations. But, you know, as far as like, you know, sticking with the airport thread, I think that what that ends up doing is it solidifies it, because I guess, you know what, I'm going to redirect, because I think to one degree you're accurate in one thing, that the agenda that was driving the post 9/11 situation was this preparedness to go to war. It was an attack on the country. We had to go to war. We had to retaliate, but it got hijacked by the military industrial complex, and we ended up having the situation where we created this war economy that was going to end up boosting up Afghanistan, which is now crumbling because that war economy is falling apart since we're starting to withdraw our troops out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think tied to that situation, we saw another Overton window shift in our perception of the countries and people from the Middle East, to be honest with you. And that's part of what has generated, because, okay, let's think back, you know, to before 9/11. I can't really recall any events where there was anything that was termed terrorism that was associated exclusively with people coming from the Middle East. So I feel like there was a window shift there too. So it was almost like a double shift. So, you know, just since we're on this topic, I really find that interesting, because I never, I mean, I don't know about you, but I never really gave the Middle East much of a thought at all before that. I don't even think I was even really aware of it, you know, any sort of issues that were going on over there before that point. But suddenly, after these attacks happen, we have our airport security Overton window shift to where there's much less freedom. And then we have an Overton window shift with public perception of people that come from that area of the world, because we're told that that's where these supposed attackers came from. Even though we never, you know, were able to confirm that was those people.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a history geek, so I mean, I knew about the Gulf War, and I knew about the the Iran hostage crisis back in the late 70s, early 80s. No, was it? Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. Iran Contra and these different things, but I really didn't know a whole terrible lot about them. I mean, I was a kid at the time. 9/11 happened. I think I was 14 or 15. So I didn't have my head too far into this kind of stuff at the time. That was really where I started paying more attention to the news and what was going on in the world.
Yeah, because suddenly, all of a sudden, it's acceptable, like you're saying, for us to go to war over there, whereas it would be unthinkable before that. And it's because of an event we're told that an event that happened, and we're told that certain people are responsible for it. And this is where they're from, so let's go. So, you know, and then you have a whole generation of people who are, you have that perception of people from that area of the world, and that particular generation, people that are my age, your age, a little bit older, you know, you had that perception sort of modified, if you will. And you know, I'm not saying that it was on purpose to modify people's perception and bring any sort of draconian laws into place like we see with airports and with you know, large group gatherings of people. But you know, it definitely seems like, since the point I'm trying to make is, since that time, we've had an acceleration of events very similar to that. Nothing on that scale, but we've seen, I mean, obviously we've seen the attacks in different countries in Europe. We've had other attacks on local soil, many of which were attributed to people, you know, coming from these areas. And to me, that seems a little bit more than just a coincidence to see that explosion happen at that point. And I understand that, you know, we did invade, but we were in Iraq and Iran. We were in the Middle East long before September 11th.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Iran hostage crisis. There wouldn't have been a hostage crisis if we hadn't overthrown the, or if we hadn't installed the Shah in Iran beforehand. But something else you mentioned the post 9/11, you know, you could call it Islamophobia, to use a more modern term now. Another interesting thing to think about too, and seeing that shift, and the way that the window seems to be on certain issues, that shifts a lot faster and a lot more intensely, like more violently shifts. So after 9/11, after 9/11, we have this, you know, general kind of sort of understanding of the Middle East, but not really. And you know, we know that a lot of times, like the things that you'd see on the news, like the killing of the Israeli Olympic athletes in Munich was done by Palestinians. You'd see things coming from Israel about conflicts with the Palestinians, you know, different things like that. And so you'd end up thinking, okay, Middle East, Arabs, violent, and, you know, stuff like that. But then after 9/11, it automatically comes to the forefront of like, oh, it's those people who did this thing to us. And it wasn't the Palestinians, obviously, but I don't know, at least in my generation, I don't know how many people had a working understanding of the differences between an Iraqi, a Palestinian, and an Afghan. But we've seen that, so we saw the window jump in one respect, but it's really not been that long since 9/11. It's been, you know, what, I guess going on 16 years now. And in that time, that window has started moving back the other way, to the point now where you've got, you know, people like social justice warriors online and people in universities and stuff like that. And this is an instance where I'm actually going to agree with them, where to an extent, I'm not going to go full on and say I fully agree with everything they say, but they, you know, this shifting that window back of thinking, oh, all Muslims are terrorists, to, you know, now they're saying like no Muslims are terrorists. I'm like, well, it's somewhere in between. Because I mean, just like with anyone, you know, anyone can become an extremist for any reason. You can look at, you know, what happened in Waco, for example. But it's interesting. It's interesting to look back, to have the hindsight and the age now, to where I'm, you know, we're now old enough to be able to look at these things and see how the window has shifted slowly, and sometimes not so slowly, over the last, you know, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and to your point, I don't necessarily, I mean, there are people out there, but this is like, these are fringe groups. You were saying that, you know, people were saying, or you mentioned that some people would say all Muslims are terrorists, and I think there are people out there that are like that. But at the same time, for the far majority of people fall into that sort of Overton window, if you will, sort of like the middle of like, no, you know, we don't believe that. But I think that there is, it's really interesting because it's such a divided topic. I bet you anything, if you took a poll of every single person in the United States, that it would be almost down the middle of how people, you know, 50-50 of how people feel about being more strict about how we vet the people that come into our country. You know, it's not necessarily, I mean, I don't feel that I agree completely with either team or side, if you will, but I do think it's prudent to have proper levels of security and investigation. And unfortunately, people who come from certain areas are going to be the target of more investigation, because That's just the nature of, unfortunately, there's some people out there that are behaving in a certain way, and because of a few bad eggs, basically everybody has to suffer almost. So yeah, I don't think there should be like hardcore, there shouldn't be like a hardcore ban, but I don't think there is a hardcore ban either. That's another one of the example of sort of narratives that are being pushed by the media, that there's this push to like not have anybody come in from these areas at all, and it's going to be shut down, and they're bad people, when there's really nobody saying that.
Yeah, no, and well, I think some people are saying that, to
But
be
that's
honest.
very few. That's fringe, and that's not somebody. I mean, for example, the president is not saying that these people are all bad.
No, I know. I'm not saying that the president is saying that. What I'm saying is that there are, and I'm agreeing with you, there are fringe groups who believe that. There are also fringe groups who believe that there should be no borders, that we should have completely open borders and allow anyone to come in who wants to come in because they say so, because that's fair. And it's not fair. Every country has the right to defend itself. It's part of it. That is, if you go as far back as you possibly can into modern state theory, that is the baseline that you know, it's kind of the baseline that you draw with national sovereignty. Do you get to make the rules for your country? Yes or no? And that's the simple, foundational rule that I think applies to every country. So that applies to the United States just as much as it applies to Mexico and Canada and Syria and Russia and England and France and, Botswana. It doesn't matter what country you're in. It just, if you're in that country, then that government has the right to set the rules for that country.
I have one more thing. I'm really sorry. I don't want to drag this out, but I just had one more thing. Sorry. That's really interesting, because, there's sort of like the argument, like if you're a parent and your children, are you able to set the rules for your children in your own house? And we have people come out, on the news and on TV saying that your kids are not your own. Shoot, I forgot her name. She used to be a host on a show. But she came out and literally said, your kids are not your own, they're the government's, and this is a well-known person. And it's like, so I feel like in a way, these are those people that are trying to shift this Overton window in a lot of different areas, so it's, if we can get the window shifted in the family, that shifts everything, because now no longer, you no longer have rights to discipline your own children. That's the government, that's sort of like the government or the group of people's responsibility to figure that out for you and tell you what's okay to do with your kids. And same thing with countries, that should we have borders? I guess that's what I'm trying to tie it in with there.
Yeah, and Stephen in the chat room just made a good point too, that some shifts are hidden and others are in your face. And I think that's a good point. I don't necessarily know if I agree that shifts are, I think shifts are sometimes forced upon us. By all means, that's absolutely right. But at the same time, there are some that are subtle changes because of human nature, I guess you could say. Human sinfulness will make us do bad things, and then human morality and understanding of being made in the image and likeness of God is what brings us back to doing the right things, if that makes sense. But yeah, I like the idea that shifts sometimes they're hidden and sometimes they're open and blatant. Yeah, because that's fascinating. That's actually, I'm going to chew on that for a little while. I don't know if I can really unpack all my thoughts on that right now, but
well, what do you think about this, Dan? Since you brought up some Bible passages or some scripture there, what do you think about the scripture that talk about Satan being the ruler of this world? And if that is the case, how much influence does he have if he's the ruler? In other words, would some sort of whatever Satan is, whether he's a physical being or an entity or I don't know, whatever. I'm not going to get into that, but do you think someone has the ability to sort of influence things like we're talking about, sort of like on a grander scale, and push those Overton windows in different areas, and then affect basically, people, sort of like convince people in the way that he tempted Jesus, right, on the mountain. So Satan, Jesus was on the mount fasting and out for 40 days in the wilderness, and Satan came to him and basically offered him all of this stuff if he would just, do what he said, basically. To me, that's I would think that that's an example in scripture where that probably does occur, even today with people that have influence. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, Scripture is clear that Satan's at work in the world, but at the same time, he's only able to do what God allows him to do. God's in ultimate control over the shifting of the window. He's also in control of every other part of the world. The only things that can happen are things that he allows to happen, and sometimes he causes them to happen. There are times where the shifting of the window is satanically inspired or demonically inspired, but I think that sometimes it's our own human nature that causes the window to shift. And it's our own desires, whether or not those are good desires or not. And Stephen's also, I like Stephen's interaction in the chat room here. He's asking, is not mankind in control of changing the shifts? And he brings up the last election, for example. And I would say yes and no to that. I think that the shift happens partially because of things that people are doing, but I think it's also important. And again, this isn't really a religious podcast, or a live stream rather. I frankly think that it's important for us to remember that. I think it was Deepak Chopra who once said that we're not human beings on a spiritual journey. We're spiritual beings on a human journey. And so there are people who are going to disagree with that kind of statement. But I think that's one little piece of truth that's out there, is that we're all spiritual beings that are living temporarily in this body, on this world, and so there is a spiritual aspect to it as well. But to some degree, people are in control of changing the window and the dialogue that's going on with it.
When you say spiritual, are you saying that it would be more like a, for lack of a better term, like a ghost? Or what do you mean when you say spiritual? Like that doesn't have a physical body?
Yeah, I mean, it's the invisible side of things. So it's the way I understand it is, that so I'm going to go Christian theology because that's my background is Christian theology. So if there's anyone else out there who's watching who doesn't agree with this, feel free to chime in the chat room and we'll chat with you about that too. Is that we are made in the image and likeness of God, right? Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay. So we agree on that. So what God is one person, or is three persons in one, right? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is the doctrine of the Trinity. If we're made in the image and likeness of God, would it not stand to reason that we are also made three parts in one? Meaning that we are body, spirit, and soul. And there's theological debate and rift that goes on with this about whether or not you can differentiate between soul and spirit. I tend to think I tend to take the theological argument that soul is more your thoughts and your emotional, your physical, intangible side, whereas your spirit is that which interacts with the spiritual world, whether that be the Holy Spirit when he comes upon you, whether that be that just uneasy feeling you get when something bad's about to happen. We would call it instincts. We would call it just a general understanding of
premonition, almost.
You could say premonition. It could be any number of things, but it's things that are out there. They seem almost external from your body and from your thoughts. It's something that you would not know otherwise. So, for instance, I don't know if you've ever met anybody who believes that they have a ghost in their house. They very well might, but we wouldn't necessarily see it as a ghost. We would see it as a demon. And while they say, "Oh, my house is haunted. There's a ghost in the house. It's opening drawers and it's closing doors and it's doing all this other stuff." I've met people who are going through that stuff, and they're not Christians. They don't understand the theology behind it, but they just have this understanding that something is going on. It's something that's not seen. It's something that we can't fully understand.
So it's like different names for the same thing, essentially, is what you're saying, like depending on your perspective.
Yeah, more or less. And so, yeah, there's times where I walk into businesses in town, and I don't know the owners. I don't know what's going on. I just have this sense of like there's something not right about this place, and then I just need to leave. I don't know if that makes sense. And that's, I don't want to get too preachy on this, but you can go into the book of Daniel. I think it's in chapter 11, if I'm not mistaken, where it talks about how Daniel had been praying for, I think 3 weeks it was, 21 days, and then the angel Gabriel came down to speak with him, but he apologized for being late because he was delayed by the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece. There's no way that a human prince could literally hold up an archangel, one of the highest spiritual beings. And the understanding within the theological circles is that when it says the prince of Persia, it doesn't mean the son of Xerxes or whoever it was at the time. It means the principality, the ruler, the demonic ruler over that particular country, which shows us that there are spiritual entities that are over particular land masses in the world, particular governments. So where there's no reason to assume that the United States is any different. So yeah, but the thing is that we also have believers who pray against that. We have people who try to do the right thing, who try to shift that window back in a godly way. So again, I don't want to get too preachy on it, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, that was interesting, and it kind of brought it full circle to my question about, that I was bringing up about Satan being the ruler of this world, and then as you were saying, there's different principalities and powers over different regions of the earth, as the Bible describes. So that's really interesting, and they're able to sort of influence things, even delay things, so to speak. So Daniel's asking God and requesting God for certain things, and then those things end up coming to pass, but they are delayed because there's a battle, so to speak, that's happening in heaven, like you said, he was fasting for 21 days. So it's interesting, sort of like dynamic there, where we're almost like through our prayers and through our supplications to God, sort of like speaking out and bringing about His will on the earth as well. So there's like sort of like that different side dynamic almost.
Yeah. Just an abrupt change. We're approaching about an hour right now. Do you want to squeeze in one more little segment, or do you want to go ahead and call it for the night?
Yeah, I think we could do one more. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Sorry for the poor segue there. I was kind of wanting to talk about this because it's kind of been in the news a lot the last week or so. I thought we could touch on the GOP's American Health Care Act, the replacement for Obamacare that passed the House this week. Chris, have you had a chance to look at it at all?
I have not.
Okay. Well, we'll have some fun. And Steven, I think you're the only one in the chat room right now, so if you have anything you want to add, feel free to chime in as well. But if you want to look it up, I'll put a link to it in the show notes to the actual Congress website with the text of the bill. It's House Resolution 1628, and I'm only going to touch on a few things because I don't know. I haven't read the entire thing. It's like 126 pages. So, and I really feel like they should make some rule to where it has to be like under 10 pages or something like that. But so some of the things that I figure first we can kind of go through it, touch on some of the things that they are removing or changing, and then maybe touch a little bit on the things that have been in Obamacare that are staying in Obamacare, or they're staying in this new, I guess people are calling it Trump Care now. One thing that the new plan is supposed to do is that I'm actually really excited about, and I know some people will probably disagree, is that it's calling for a repeal of the individual and the employer mandates. So what that means, if I understand it correctly, is that the individual mandate means that individuals are required to purchase insurance, otherwise they face a tax penalty, and that's been one of the biggest things that I've been against since the law passed. Is the government has no business telling me that I have to buy insurance, especially at an unreasonable rate, or anybody else, for instance. There's no reason to have the government make that decision for you. And as far as I understand the employer mandate, if I'm remembering correctly, that means that the employer, this is the reason why when I go to work, I can't work more than 30 hours a week. Because if you're over 30 hours a week, the employer is required to provide insurance for you, which is a tremendous cost to the employer. So for instance, where I work, it's we have, I think, almost 500 employees, and there's no way that you could make a profit of, you couldn't turn a profit if you had to pay for insurance for, on top of the employment tax and on top of the payroll tax and everything, to have to then pay, for insurance for 500 employees. There's no reason for the, I mean, I think companies should do that, but I don't think the government should be there to make that call. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that we should be mandated to do something like that. But something interesting that I did that just came to mind is in certain states, in certain areas of the country, there are laws. I mean, obviously, we have to carry insurance on our motor vehicles. We have to carry insurance in some areas. We have to, excuse me, that's across the country. You have to have insurance, and even then, as recently as probably like 10, 15, 20 years ago, there were some states still where you did not have to carry auto insurance. And but I was also going to mention renter's insurance is a requirement in certain states. So it's interesting to think that, sort of our Overton window in this area has shifted as well, or has begun to shift, because we've actually become, in the last, how long has Obamacare been around? Like 4, 5, 6 years, something like that.
Came out in 2009.
Okay, so 8 years. 8 years, 8 or 7 or 8 years. So, and that during that period of time, we've actually, a lot of people, residents of the United States, have actually become accustomed to this just being the fact. But I think everyone could agree that nobody likes to have to pay a penalty if they don't want to carry insurance. So in that sense, I agree. I think that the government should not be required to do that. I mean, your life is in your own hands. So if you don't want to carry insurance, that's completely up to you.
Sure. Another thing that was in this new bill is something I don't like, is a continuous coverage requirement. This kind of goes along with what you were just saying about, your life is your life. It allows insurance companies to charge you an additional 30% on top of your premium if you go a certain amount of time without insurance. So like if you have a gap in between your insurance there, so say you have insurance for 3 years, and then all of a sudden you change employers, and you don't have coverage for 6 months or something like that, I can't remember the exact timing, then when you sign back up for insurance, they can charge you an additional 30% on top of that.
Is it a one-time charge, or is it
I'm not exactly sure. I think it might be continual until like the insurance company deems otherwise.
That seems pretty draconian. They can just slap you with 30% extra just because you didn't carry. Well, so what if you had a 1 month lapse because of some sort of difficulty, and they can hit you with 30%? Yeah, I don't like that.
I think it's something like 3 months, or maybe it was even longer than that. So it was a substantial amount of time, but still, it happens.
Yeah.
And I don't think these are things saying that this is what will. I mean, it's not. I don't think this is the government trying to say this is how insurance companies have to function. I think what it's saying is these are options that the insurance companies will now have, which is good that the government's not forcing these regulations in a sense, but this is the other side of free market capitalism at times, is that the government doesn't need to be making these rules, but at the same time, I can understand why people want the government to make these rules, because there are these companies that will try to screw over the little guy. They'll try to take you for everything you can. This is the reason why we have to have a provision saying that you can't cancel insurance for people with a pre-existing condition. But at the same time, I would look at it in terms of like, well, if insurance companies A, B, C, and D are all doing that, then that provides an opportunity for insurance company E to come in, to come up and make a better product with a better, price, or at least comparable price, and not have that requirement on there, so people will have an option to switch. But then there's also like the cartel of the industry, which they all kind of stick together and do the same thing so they can maintain a profit margin. But I digress on that one. Sorry, I was just reading a comment from Steven there. It's a good point. He mentions being cheaper for the employer to pay the employee to get their own health care. And I agree. I think that it would be cheaper to do that. I just frankly, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I want the government to be as minimally viable product as humanly possible, because my general feeling on it is that the government sucks at pretty much everything, and they suck at this too, and I just don't like having to deal with it.
I think if I'm understanding Steven's point correctly, he's saying that it's better for the employer to pay part of it, the premium. Is that correct?
I don't know. Maybe
So
Steven, if you're sitting there watching, maybe if you can clarify a little bit, because I think we're reading it two different ways.
So if that is the case, though, employers tend to basically count they know that that employees are going to take salaried employees are going to take benefits, so they take that into account when they're calculating your salary when they hire you. So the employer does understand how much the cost is going to be to have an employee. It's never exactly what the employee's salary is. There's always other things like bonuses and incentives and things like that in different companies. So I mean, I kind of disagree with you there, Dan, because I think that companies should have to pay a portion of it, and I think it's a good thing, and it's taken into account. As far as on the company's books, so I think that's a good thing.
Okay, well, and I mean, I think it's good when companies do it. I mean, so for instance, here's
because I don't like to have to get insurance through the state.
No,
like
I don't. That's not what. That's not what I'm advocating.
Well, to me, that'd be the only viable alternative. So, I mean, if I wasn't getting insurance through my employer, the options are limited and typically more expensive, just based on the market that's out there. So, I would.
Well, that's part of the problem. And as far as I see it, is that there's not an active market. There's this cartel of insurance companies who maintain relatively the same price, who maintain relatively the same coverage, and all the Obamacare did was codify it. So we have these standardization policies that they have to adhere to, which makes it unable to have any kind of real competition, anyways. And so you don't end up having smaller players coming in. Like let's compare it to let's use the analogy of like phone providers. Okay, so you've got the big dogs. You've got Verizon. You've got AT&T, T-Mobile. You've got these guys who national coverage, huge companies, and their plans are all pretty comparable. They're pretty much the same thing here and there. One might have better coverage in this area. One might have better coverage in this area, and so people generally have three options when they stop, like when they're thinking just off the top of their head. But because within this, for instance, within that industry, you have companies like Page Plus or Ting or different companies like that, these smaller providers who are kind of up and coming, and they're offering a different business model. They're offering more incentives to go with their model instead. And so you're not locked into this cartel of the major providers where they maintain the same price and relatively the same service and really poor customer service. You get these smaller companies that are able to come up and say, like for instance, with Ting, I've heard about Ting a lot, and I really like the company. It's like you pay $6 for the line, and then you just pay for what you use, minutes, messages, and data, and that's it. And you only pay for what you use, and if you don't need to use it that month, you turn it off, and you get full control over it. And I feel like
that sounds like a plan from 1999. Pay for minutes that you use.
Yeah, I mean,
what a novel idea.
I mean, it's great, and it's working. It's working really, really well for that industry. For instance, I went onto their website and checked what based on what my phone usage would be to activate an old Android phone that I have sitting around, and it would be $12 a month, as opposed to 40 some odd that you would pay to activate a smartphone on Verizon or AT&T. But you can relate that analogy back to the insurance industry. Why should we all have to choose from these big national providers that are all offering the same things, when there could be smaller providers that could come up if there was actual competition in the market, and they could offer a better plan to make it more competitive, which would in turn drive prices back down. But what I'm saying is I'm not saying that we need to have either the government programs or have the businesses pay for the entire or have the business pay for the entire thing. I think businesses should have the option to do so, and they always have had the option to do so. But there shouldn't be coercion involved to say to these companies, if you don't do this, we will fine you or shut you down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think we both agree on that part. For example, my company that I work for just switched our dental providers, and I'm pretty sure that was based on as a financial decision, that it was just more cost effective and possibly better coverage for employees. For a context, the company I work for, has about I think 600 or 700 employees. So it's not a small company. It's not an extremely large company either. But so you know, and this dental company is one that I've not necessarily heard of, but it sounded like their coverage is really good. So I think there are, like what you're saying, there are players out there that do serve that purpose, and you just kind of got to dig for them at this point.
Sure.
Unfortunately, the way that it's gone, I think, is that these large companies just sort of acquire the other small companies before they can get big enough, before they can grow to be the big fish in the pond, essentially. So, for example, Apple buys out people that they want to use their technology, or Google buys out, I don't know, Maps, different people who did different apps. In the same way, AT&T bought out a company called Alltel. They tried to buy out T-Mobile. They've had a lot of acquisitions, throughout their history, and they just continue to get bigger and bigger. So, how could we even the playing field? How could that be even, since the laws for acquiring companies seem pretty lax, and it's almost bordering on, you're saying cartel, and it's almost bordering on monopoly in certain industries. How can we prevent that?
Well, I think really the only option we have left is to have the government take full control over healthcare. I mean, that's really the only option left. And in some ways, thank you. In some ways, I'm joking, but I mean, I think that's the goal in the long run. Is there's the guy who was like the chief architect of the Affordable Care Act. He was caught on camera in a lecture. He basically said the exact same thing, that the plan was designed to fail so that it would prepare the way for socialized medicine, for single payer. But I don't know. I think that
it's all taxpayer funded, so we're all paying for it anyway.
I don't know. And that's the thing, is that it frustrates me that I don't have a good answer, and I don't really know how to make it work. Because the hearts and minds of the individual citizens needs to change before the industry can change, if that makes sense. Because as long as we're locked into this, I guess this kind of goes back to the Overton window. As long as people are stuck in this mindset that they have to get insurance through Aetna or Blue Cross or whoever these other bigger insurance companies may be, then that's what they're going to do. And when it becomes, which is the same reason why you still have, like 90 some odd percent market share going to the big, like the 3 or 4 big phone companies. And you've got just a handful of people who are using these smaller companies, like I was mentioning, Ting or Boost Mobile or Page Plus or whoever. But it's become slowly over time more acceptable to use those prepaid plans. And so what we need to do is find a way to shift that window, even slowly over time, back to to be able to get these smaller insurance companies. And I want to touch on Stephen in the chat room, because he's brought up a few good points too while we've been talking. He clarified a little bit more on what we were talking about, and he said, if the employer would pay the employee higher wages, that the employee could afford to buy his or her own insurance. He also touched on the 2010 healthcare plan.
That's a good one. Give them more of an give them more money and let them choose how they want to use it, whether they want to buy insurance. That's a good option.
Yeah, but I also, and the only thing I would disagree with, I'm not going to say I disagree with that. I think that's a valid point. I think the thing I would be hesitant on is that you can go to the other extreme with that, which is what happened in Seattle, where they demanded $15 an hour, minimum wage, and now people are asking to, have a reduction in hours so they don't lose their benefits. I don't know. I think that it's important to pay people more, but I feel like if people are going to be paid more, we shouldn't be paying them more just simply for the sake of paying more. We should be. I'm not going to say, I say socially, but I don't mean it in terms of like using the government to do so. I think as a society, as individuals, we should be doing more to help our fellow citizens to better themselves. For instance, like I'm very thankful for the people who I've met over my many years, my parents, friends from church and things like that, who have helped me to have a strong work ethic, who have helped me to understand better what what I need to do to make it in the world. How to save, how to run a business, things like that. Things that I didn't learn on my own, and I didn't go to some school to learn it. Like I learned it on the job. I learned it, through conversations with people that do know about these things. Because I think if we just start paying employees more just to pay them more, it does more of a disservice to the employee than it does, to just simply give them more money to do with what they want. If they don't know how to spend that money responsibly, they're going to squander it. If they don't, if we're able to, and I've advocated for this for a while, like offering, giving, if we have to use federal money, fine, send block grants to the states to allocate to individual municipalities and counties so that they can offer scholarships like the one I just had to the local technical college here for my IT classes, to offer those scholarships to low income students, to people who don't have an education, who don't have a way to to get out of the situation. So that way they're able to get a job that pays higher wages, that they're able to then afford their own insurance, and that can propel them into a future that is better for them and it's better for their family. And it's not just saying, oh, now you're going to get paid $15 an hour to flip hamburgers at McDonald's, which I've done, and it's really not $15 worth of work.
But here's the thing, and I live in Los Angeles, so there's like a little bit, cost of living is a little bit higher. So I think part of the argument, and I'm by no means agreeing with paying people $15 an hour to flip burgers, but part of the argument is that it's very difficult to live on that type of an income, and I agree with that. And some would say, well, why don't you just go like get an education or work your way up and get a better job? But part of the problem with that is people just don't want to. A lot of time, and in some cases, apply themselves to that. They want sort of like the easy, quick fix, so they can just do what they want. And minimum wage, I feel like it should be a percentage. I mean, there should be some sort of a calculation out there of what the cost of living is, depending on the area you live in, and then the minimum wage should be calculated based on different factors that come in. So it's like a formula, and it's like a percentage or something of that. And you get that as your hourly wage, so that when it calculates out to you, this person worked between 35 to 40 hours, they can afford to pay for their rent, pay for their their mode of transportation, for their clothing and what else that they need, and with some amount of disposable income. Now, I mean, maybe that idea is really bad, because maybe that calculation brings it out to like, that all depends on your lifestyle, but maybe that calculation brings it out to more like $20 an hour, depending on where you live. But I think that would in a lot of ways be more fair. So depending on where you live, it's just the cost of living.
I mean, okay, so there's a few things there that I want to respond to, and then Stephen made another good point that I want to respond to you. Stephen, thanks for being here, because it's awesome, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. First, the minimum wage, I can agree to an extent, but I have to make one caveat. I don't agree with the federal minimum wage. I think it should be delegated by the state.
Yes.
Because it's, a federal minimum wage. So say they make it a $15 minimum wage for the entire country.
Which is stupid, because every area does not have the same cost of living. For
exactly.
example, in Los Angeles, the minimum wage is $10. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, here it's like, I think 7 or 8 or something like that. But I mean, I wasn't aware of what California's was. But I mean, I can still imagine that's not very much for living in Los Angeles. But at the same time, you mentioned, a formula to say, well, this person worked 35 to 40 hours, so they can afford this, that, and the other. But what that doesn't account for is the individual needs of that person. So for instance, if you're an 18-year-old single guy in good health and you work that many hours in a week, yeah, you probably should be able to afford your rent and your food and stuff like that, and then have some extra spending money to go have fun with. Now imagine you're let's just go with the same thing. I'm 18. Well, not even supporting a family. Let's just go with an 18-year-old guy who's got health problems, who needs to has to buy certain supplies, or maybe he's supporting somebody who's sick, or whatever the case may be. you can't necessarily have a formula to say that it's affordable because maybe the other expenses that they have go beyond that. But my point of this is not that we need to figure out some state mandated formula for how to decide whether or not people are making enough money. I feel like all that's doing is putting a band-aid over the underlying issue, if that makes sense. But going back to the medical side of things, Stephen made a good point. To cut out the middleman and pay the doctor each month, and the doctor invest the money and it makes as much money as they want, but provide the health care for the people. And there are doctors who do that. Did you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, I mean, then you run into doctors gouging people.
Possibly, but not necessarily. So, for instance,
now. I mean, I'll just give you an example. So we had to, get some dental work for someone in my family, and the dentist office tries to tack on all this extra stuff, even when you do have insurance. And we've run into cases where for some time periods we didn't even have insurance, and we had to take care of certain things. And we looked at the bills, we looked at the different things that they charge you for when you don't have insurance, and it's just between you and the hospital, between you and the doctor, and it's insane.
Sure. Oh yeah, no, I ended up going to the emergency room not long ago because I've had sinus infections in the past, but this was the worst one I've ever had, and it legitimately felt like someone had broken my cheekbone. And so my wife, your lovely sister, she told me go to the hospital, and I got the bill, and I didn't have insurance when I went, and so it was an astronomical bill, and we're working, we're talking with the hospital and figuring something out, but it's like that I understand. But the point that I was going to bring up is that there are doctors who do that, and for instance, we go to a doctor as well, and she's a doctor of integrative medicine, so it's kind of like a more holistic doctor. It's not necessarily, she's not prescribing medicine for the sake of prescribing medicine. It's not like a doctor's office that's funded by these big pharmaceutical companies. They'll prescribe actual pharmaceuticals, but they'll also prescribe homeopathic remedies and stuff like that might help, or help you to change your diet and things like that, which I've always been skeptical of in the past, but it's really been working, at least for us. And it's one of those things where we pay a certain amount. I think we pay $150 a month, or I'm sorry, one-time thing of $150, and then I believe it's $50 a month or something like that, or $50 per visit. But the point being that we pay the doctor directly, and we don't have to go through insurance with it. And it's not an outstanding cost. I mean, it's expensive if we all have to go at the same time, but it's manageable, and they'll work with you on it and everything like that. And even the but when they have to go do lab work and stuff like that, then the insurance will pay for those kind of things. Because she's an actual medical doctor. She's just practicing medicine in a slightly different way, and more holistic way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's great that you have a situation like that with a doctor who can do that. About the prescriptions, I had a doctor who I got rid of, who would literally, I would go in for my checkups, my physicals, standard, no real issues, and he would try to prescribe something for me every time I went in. I was like, what is going on? I don't need any medicine. I don't need anything for this. I just need to, I'm perfectly healthy. And this guy would try to prescribe every time. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm. If you don't mind, since we're actually going on pretty late now, so I'm going to just kind of fire through a few of these other things. And if there's anything you want to mention, just go ahead and chime in. Just a few other things that are in this bill. It allows insurance to charge more for pre-existing conditions. I'm not particularly fond of that, to be honest. I guess it kind of makes sense why they would do that, but it makes it feel unethical, to be honest. Just because somebody's had a pre-existing condition in the past doesn't necessarily, it doesn't make them any less, I don't know, maybe it's just me.
They're less healthy, technically, if they have cancer.
Yeah,
so I guess
I can understand it. I guess it's just it just doesn't feel right, I guess. It allows insurers the ability to not provide these things, and I'm going to give you a list of things that it allows them to not have to provide based on a state-based federal waiver. So like the state can apply to the federal government for a waiver for insurance companies in their state to not provide these specific things. And I don't think it would be all of these, because that would kind of put them out of business. But outpatient care, emergency services, hospitalization, maternity services, mental health services, substance abuse treatment, prescription drugs, rehab, lab work, preventive care, and pediatric services. So it's kind of a lot. And at first glance, I was like, that's awful. They're going to let them not do those things. But at the same time, it's like, it kind of can make it more, it allows for more competitive plans in the long run too. If you don't have to offer, because apparently under Obamacare, every single plan had to offer every single one of those things. Whereas now if you don't have kids, you don't need pediatric services, if that makes sense. If you're not, if you don't do drugs and you're not an alcoholic, you don't need substance abuse treatment. So you can get a plan with maybe a better premium that offers, it's more specific to what you have, or what you need, rather. It creates a patient and state stability fund. So it's apparently it's $100 billion fund to reduce the costs of those aforementioned treatments if they're needed. So essentially it's a government subsidy of those treatments in specific instances. I'm just going to jump around to a few other things that came in. Delays the Cadillac tax. I don't know if you're familiar with what that one is.
Sounds familiar. Can you explain that?
It's an excise tax on high-quality employer-sponsored insurance policies. So basically, your insurance companies, these employers would be able to, there are certain companies that want to provide really good top-end insurance to their employees. Maybe it's a company with just a few workers, and they want to make sure that they have the best care possible. What this is that basically, if I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. I think it's like a little over 10,000 per individual, or 27,000 per family, or something like that. It will, like, if the policy exceeds that per year, then there's an additional tax that's put on top of that against that company. So basically, it discourages employers from providing high quality insurance at the risk of being taxed again on top of what they're already paying in terms of like the payroll tax and having to pay the employees and stuff like that.
So it's like a lawyer, like a law firm tax. Probably a law firm would do something like that, right? As far as like covering their employees, like something more wealthy, right? Like you're saying, small company.
I see what you're saying.
People.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that that's a good analogy for
like Robin Hood, or not Robin Hood in reverse, or no Robin Hood taking. Where's that tax going though? Is that going to help us?
I mean, I'm assuming that it. Well, the thing that I find interesting is everyone talks about the the Republicans as being all about big business, and this is a plan where it's not it's not really benefiting the big business because it delays the tax for about another 9 years. But they've kind of been kicking this can down the road. The Democrats have been as well, so it's not really anything terribly new. I feel like that's something that should just go away. There's no real reason to have it, except to punish those who are maybe more well off and want to provide better for their employees.
Some would say they could afford it.
Yeah, but if it's a percentage, it doesn't matter if it's going to increase the dollar amount, but I mean, what's the difference between 10% if you make $100 and 10% if you make $1 million? It's still the same percentage,
Yeah, very true.
And it's going to affect both people the same, regardless. Anyway, I digress on that one. There's some changes to Medicaid that are going in there. They're repealing, they're aiming to repeal Medicaid expansion. I don't fully understand what all that meant, so I'm not going to try and really speak on it, but it's in, if you end up going and you want to read more about it in the actual bill text, it's in section 112. There's a provision in there to defund Planned Parenthood for a year and then increase funding to community health centers. This is a controversial topic, but I'll just be honest. I'm happy about that. I don't like Planned Parenthood. I know a lot of people do. I feel like if they were a legitimate service, they would do more than what they do. So, I mean, with the exception of abortions, community health centers provide exactly the same services and then some, usually significantly more services than Planned Parenthood does. And if Planned Parenthood is able to, to raise money and fund themselves, then why would we need to fund them publicly anyways if they're doing things that half the country disagrees with? But I like the idea of increasing funding for community health centers. Again, all these things I really wish were done just solely by the state and not having to worry about, the not having money coming in from the federal government, but I understand that some states are wealthier than others and can't necessarily afford to bring that much money into those community health centers. But this provision would provide $422 million to community health centers in low-income areas. So I think that's kind of cool. And a lot of these community health centers they provide services like medical services, dental, vision, stuff like that. So a couple of things that are going to stay in there. Insurers are required to cover what people are still required to cover people with pre-existing conditions, so that's not going to change, which is good. I still think this is stupid, but people who are 26 years and under are still on their parents' plan, or can still be on their parents' insurance plan. I don't know how you feel about that. I always thought it was dumb. Like, why are we continuing to let people be children until they're 26? And that's all I got on that. I had another thing on there, but I didn't finish the note. So you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective of what we just went over and what I know of it, I think that it's a step forward. It's a move away from what some of the issues that a lot of us felt made Obamacare not very friendly to the taxpayer and to the public, and sort of, the issue about, people being able to decide their own fate and in essence, whether they have insurance or not. So that sort of puts it back. This bill seems to put that back into the consumer's hand. And so I applaud it for that. I've heard it sort of touted as Obamacare light, and, judging from what you've said, shared with us so far, that's basically what it seems like to me. There's a lot of similarities, and they seem to just make the differences where where the public would sort of say, yay, that's good. We can choose to have insurance again. And then the rest of it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right on. I mean, I started reading this bill, and I was hesitant about what to think about it because of what everyone's saying about it. And I tend not to want to just listen to the pundits and what they had to say. But I really feel like this bill is just a crap sandwich, and I don't see why we need to put it out there and make it law, because it's not anything different than what we already have. It's just, all this is doing is it's going to allow companies to reap the benefits rather than the government. And I don't feel like that actually does good for the American people.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've gone way over time again.
Yeah.
So we did a good job this week.
It was exciting. We had Nick Steve in the chat. Thank you, Steve, for chatting with us. I mean, that's cool. I think I got really excited, both of us. We actually had someone in the chat.
Yeah, it was fun. So yeah, if anyone who's watching, tell your friends, hop in the chat room, have some fun with us. I'm not going to do the send off yet. That's your job this week, Chris. Sure. But I just wanted to encourage you guys, if you like this, make sure you hit the like button, give us a thumbs up for long form content, because it's not really YouTube friendly. And also, if you would please subscribe. We had a few subscribers the first week, but we haven't really gotten any since then. And the more subscribers we get, the more YouTube likes us. So we want them to like us. Yeah, as Chris mentioned earlier on, we're going to be trying to convert this into a podcast format. I'm kind of taking care of the back-end infrastructure on that, and it's just taking me a little extra time. So we will let you know when that's up and ready to go. So, Chris, I'll let you take it over from here.
Yes, sir. So we are very thankful for just being able to be on the air on YouTube and to sort of put our thoughts out there for you guys to dissect and to think about, sort of food for thought. It was great to have Stephen in the chat room and to be putting his ideas out there. Again, we want to encourage everyone that views to put out questions or ideas that they have, and we'd love to hop onto it. As you can see, we definitely went way over our. We usually try to keep it to about an hour, and we went over, and I think that's cool this time. So, hey, if we get people that are interested in it, then we'll stay as long as there's content to talk about, or as long as we can before it's bedtime. So we're going to close now. I just want to close with this, just a reminder that tomorrow is the election in France, and it's a pretty big deal. There's a lot of different there's two different parties that are involved in the election. There's Emmanuel Macron, the supposed centrist, and then there's Marine Le Pen, who is being labeled as the far right, sort of the Donald Trump candidate, if you will. It's basically Donald Trump versus Barack Obama, if I could simplify it in that way. To those of you who haven't been following the election, this very important election could have quite a bit of an impact on the future of the European Union, because France is, after the United Kingdom, another one of the largest countries that are in the United Kingdom. And I believe if Le Pen gets elected, she would most certainly move France out of the European Union. So that's food for thought. I personally think that it would be a good thing to break that up. I don't see a reason why sovereign countries should have to sort of follow the rules and tax laws and financial laws of a giant government. That's just, as Dan put it earlier, he's not a big fan of too much government, and I'm not a big fan of too much government. So if you have a government telling another government or governments what to do, I just think that's just a recipe for just too much control. And countries should be free to make their own decisions. And just to finish that up, I really hope that we continue to move forward in our own country, despite anyone's differences with the events that have taken place with our current president or with the choices that he's making. We have to continue to fight for what we believe in, but we also need to have a proper discourse and discussion amongst people of different opinions. And that's kind of one thing that we're trying to do here, is just have a good analytical discourse on events, and hopefully just bring things to the table that you haven't thought of. So thank you for watching. We appreciate your viewership. Please do subscribe. And until next time, 2 weeks from now, this is Chris signing off, and Dan. Have a good night.